Cowboys Nation, stop everything you're doing right now because what I'm about to tell you could completely reshape the Dallas Cowboys defense for years to come. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. This is a full-blown defensive overhaul, and the names being connected to America's team right now are absolutely massive. We're talking about a future Hall of Fame linebacker. We're talking about a former All-Pro shutdown cornerback, and we're talking about a Dallas defense that, quite frankly, has been embarrassed over the past couple of seasons. But that could all be about to change. If you're a diehard Cowboys fan, you need to hear every single word of this video because by the end, you're going to understand exactly why this offseason could be the most important one in recent memory. So do me a favor right now, smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join the family because we are pushing hard for 15,000 subscribers, and I only want real Cowboys fans riding with us on this journey. Now let's get into it because Cowboys Nation, things are about to get very interesting. Let me set the stage here because if you watched this Dallas Cowboys defense last season, you already know how bad things got. I'm not here to sugarcoat anything. I'm not here to make excuses. The reality is this defense was a liability, and it showed up week after week after week. We're talking about a unit that finished 28th in the entire NFL in expected points added against the run. Let that sink in for a moment. 28th. That means only 4 teams in the league were worse at stopping the run than the Dallas Cowboys. That's not just bad. That's historically bad. That's the kind of performance that gets coordinators fired. That's the kind of performance that forces front offices to completely rethink their approach. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. But here's where it gets even more concerning. It wasn't just the run defense that struggled. The secondary has been surviving on flashes rather than consistent dominance. We've seen moments of brilliance here and there, but we haven't seen the kind of lockdown coverage that strikes fear into opposing quarterbacks. And when you combine a leaky run defense with an inconsistent secondary, you get exactly what we saw last season. Chunk plays given up left and right, 3rd and longs converted like they were nothing. Explosive plays that completely shifted momentum in games Dallas should have won. The identity of this defense was non-existent. There was no attitude, there was no swagger, there was no unit that opposing offenses truly feared. And that's a problem because throughout Cowboys history, the best teams have always had a defense that could impose its will on opponents. Think about those 90s Super Bowl teams. Think about the Doomsday Defense era. Those units had a personality. They had an edge. They made offenses uncomfortable from the opening snap. This current Cowboys defense hasn't had that in a long time, and the front office knows it. So now we're seeing Dallas being connected to some truly massive names that could completely flip the script on this defense. And the first name I want to talk about is someone who needs absolutely no introduction. We're talking about Bobby Wagner. Yes, that Bobby Wagner, the future first ballot Hall of Famer, the 11-time All-Pro selection, the Super Bowl champion, the guy who has been one of the most dominant linebackers in NFL history for over a decade. And right now, multiple reports are suggesting that the Dallas Cowboys could be the perfect landing spot for him. Cowboys Nation, I need you to understand the magnitude of what this could mean, because this isn't just about adding a good player. This is about adding a defensive quarterback. This is about adding a tone setter. This is about adding the kind of leader this defense has been desperately missing. Now let me give you some background on Bobby Wagner because even though most football fans know his name, I don't think people fully appreciate just how remarkable his career has been. This man was drafted by the Seattle Seahawks back in 2012, and from the moment he stepped on the field, he was a problem for opposing offenses. He was the anchor of that legendary Legion of Boom defense that terrorized the NFL for years. He was the guy making the calls, setting the alignments, and flying to the football play after play after play. During his time in Seattle, he racked up 6 first-team All-Pro selections. He went to the Pro Bowl 8 times. He won a Super Bowl ring. And he did it all while being one of the most consistent performers at his position in league history. Then he went to the Los Angeles Rams, and guess what happened? He kept producing at an elite level. He proved that his dominance wasn't just a product of the system he was in. It was a product of his own incredible talent, instincts, and work ethic. But here's the thing that absolutely blows my mind, Cowboys Nation. Bobby Wagner is 35 years old right now. 35. At an age where most linebackers are either retired or barely hanging on as rotational players, this man is still putting up numbers that would make younger players jealous. In 2025, at 35 years old, Bobby Wagner recorded 162 total tackles. He had 4.5 sacks. He had 2 interceptions. He had multiple tackles for loss and quarterback hits. And perhaps most impressively, he graded out with a 90-plus run defense grade from Pro Football Focus for the 4th consecutive season. That's not just solid production from a veteran. That's elite production from anyone at any age. The fact that he's doing this in his mid-30s tells you everything you need to know about the kind of player and professional Bobby Wagner is. And this is exactly what the Cowboys need right now. Think about the problems we just discussed. The run defense ranking near the bottom of the league, the lack of a commanding presence in the middle of the field, the absence of a true leader who can get everyone aligned and accountable. Bobby Wagner checks every single one of those boxes. His football IQ is off the charts. He diagnoses plays before they even develop. He puts teammates in the right positions. He makes the calls that simplify everything for the players around him. When you have a guy like that in the middle of your defense, the entire unit becomes smarter. The entire unit becomes more disciplined. The entire unit becomes more trustworthy when the game is on the line. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. He's 35 years old. How much longer can he really play at this level? And that's a fair question. But here's why I think this move makes so much sense for Dallas right now. This doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. We're talking about a 1-year deal, maybe 2 years maximum. Low financial risk with incredibly high potential impact. The Cowboys have young talent on this roster. They have pieces that need time to develop. What they don't have is experienced leadership that can help those young players reach their potential. Bobby Wagner provides that bridge. He comes in, he stabilizes the run defense immediately. He mentors the younger linebackers on the roster, and he helps establish the kind of culture and standard that this defense has been lacking. That's a win-win scenario no matter how you look at it. And let's not forget about the new defensive coordinator, Christian Parker. This is a coach who values intelligence, flexibility, and discipline. He wants to run a defense that's multiple, that can adapt to different situations, that can disguise coverages and keep offenses guessing. Bobby Wagner is the perfect player for that kind of system because he's seen everything. He's played against every offensive scheme imaginable. He knows how to adjust on the fly. He knows how to communicate changes to his teammates. Having a player like that working with a coordinator like Christian Parker could be a match made in football heaven. Now, Cowboys Nation, I want to pivot to another name that's been circulating in connection with the Dallas Cowboys, and this one is definitely more controversial. We're talking about Jalen Ramsey. Yes, that Jalen Ramsey. The guy who used to be considered the best cornerback in the NFL. The guy who talked trash to everybody and backed it up play after play. The guy who locked down #1 receivers and made it look easy. But here's the thing. That was a few years ago. And right now, there are some serious questions about whether Jalen Ramsey is still that same player. Let me break down the situation because there's a lot to unpack here. There's been a proposed trade floating around that would send Jalen Ramsey to the Dallas Cowboys in exchange for just a 5th-round pick in 2026. On the surface, that sounds like an absolute steal. You're talking about a former All-Pro, a guy who's earned over $80 million in his career, a player with undeniable talent and experience, and all it would cost is a late-round pick. But when you dig deeper, you start to understand why the price might be so low. In 2025, Jalen Ramsey's numbers were not what we've come to expect from him. He allowed a completion rate over 70% when targeted. He allowed a passer rating of over 118 when quarterbacks threw in his direction. Those are not elite numbers. Those are not even good numbers. Those are the kind of numbers that get defensive backs benched. And perhaps the most telling sign of all is that Ramsey got moved around throughout the season. He started on the outside, then got moved to the slot, then eventually shifted to safety. Teams don't move elite shutdown corners around like that unless something is changing. That's a major red flag that cannot be ignored. But here's where the situation gets even more complicated. The Pittsburgh Steelers are currently paying Jalen Ramsey a massive salary. His 2026 cap hit is $19.5 million. And here's the kicker. If they cut him, they save all of that money with zero dead cap. That means this isn't just a trade situation. There's a very real possibility that Ramsey could be outright released. And if that happens, the Cowboys wouldn't even need to give up a draft pick. They could just sign him as a free agent, potentially at a reduced salary. Now let's talk about why Dallas might be interested in Ramsey despite all these concerns. The reality is this secondary needs help badly. Trevon Diggs is gone. Darren Bland is the only truly proven piece back there. That's not a stable situation heading into a new season. That's a gamble. And when you see a name like Jalen Ramsey become available, even with the questions surrounding him, it's tempting to take a shot because the upside is still there. This is a guy who knows how to compete at the highest level. This is a guy who has versatility to play multiple positions. This is a guy who could potentially bounce back and recapture some of that elite form. Under Christian Parker, who values flexibility and creative defensive schemes, Ramsey could be used like a chess piece, moving around the formation and creating confusion for opposing offenses. But Cowboys Nation, I have to be real with you. The money is the biggest issue here. $19.5 million is a massive cap hit for a player who's coming off a down season. Dallas needs to be smart with their finances. They can't just chase big names and hope everything works out. If the Steelers are willing to eat part of that salary in a trade, or if they restructure the deal to make it more cap-friendly, then maybe this makes sense. But if the Cowboys have to take on that full contract, I don't think it's the right move. The risk is simply too high. Here's my honest take on the Ramsey situation. If he gets released, absolutely go sign him. At that point, it becomes a low-risk, high-reward situation. You can negotiate a team-friendly deal, see what he has left, and cut ties if it doesn't work out. But if you have to trade assets and absorb that full contract, I think Dallas needs to pass. There are other ways to address the secondary that don't involve taking on that kind of financial commitment for a player whose best days might be behind him. So where does this leave us, Cowboys Nation? We're looking at a franchise that clearly recognizes its defensive deficiencies. We're looking at a front office that's being aggressive in exploring options. We're looking at a team that knows it needs to change the identity of its defense if it wants to compete for championships. Bobby Wagner feels like the safer, smarter move. He addresses an immediate need, provides elite production and leadership, and doesn't require a long-term commitment. Jalen Ramsey is the higher-risk, higher-reward option. If he bounces back, you look like a genius. If he doesn't, you've wasted valuable cap space on a declining player. The beauty of this situation is that Dallas might be able to land both of these players if they play their cards right. Imagine a defense with Bobby Wagner commanding the middle of the field and a revitalized Jalen Ramsey locking down receivers on the outside. Add that to a strong defensive line and some young playmakers, and suddenly you've got a unit that can compete with anyone. That's the dream scenario. That's what Cowboys fans are hoping for. And this offseason, it might actually be possible. Cowboys Nation, I want to hear from you. Would you sign Bobby Wagner? Would you trade for Jalen Ramsey? Do you think these moves would finally fix this defense? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now, because this is exactly the kind of conversation we need to be having. This offseason is about building a defense that can finish, a defense that can close out games, a defense that opposing offenses genuinely fear, and these moves might be the first steps toward that goal. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because this story is developing fast, and you don't want to miss a single update. I'll see you in the next video. Let's go Cowboys.